Welcome to Mānoa Heritage Center. For some reason, this is our second Kahaukani Conversation of 2020 and the first virtual one we've ever done. We've invited special guest Kumu Taiwi Crouch to share his interpretation of the significance of this solar phenomenon that's happening on Saturday, with the goal of better understanding ourselves in this place and time. And if you just popped into Zoom, you can see I put in the chat an additional webinar that's happening tonight via Hawaii Nui Akea School of Hawaiian Knowledge with Lily Kala. And you can just click on the link. I think they're doing it on Facebook Live as well. Just as an introduction, Kumu Taiwi Crouch is an expert in Hawaiian studies and medieval history. He began teaching at Punahou School in 1981, teaching Hawaiian history and culture, medieval and Asian history. He transitioned to environmental and outdoor education in 1995 and was co-director of the Gates Family Science Center, specializing in Hawaiian science until he retired from teaching in 2017. He helped to build and sail Hokulea, navigating by traditional means to Tahiti, Samoa, and the Marquesas. He studies, performs, and teaches traditional Hawaiian hula and is a member of Nava'a Lalani Kahuna a Pu'ukohola, a traditional Hawaiian society that performs rituals and protocols for Hawaiian events as well as public venues. He's also a traditional wood and bone carver. So as we go through this presentation, if you have any questions, if you could put them in the chat box, we will address them and ask Kumu Tai at the end of his presentation. And yeah, and if you have any other concerns, if you can't hear well or whatever, just put that in the chat box as well. And Jessica, who looks like she's Jenny Leung, is my co-pilot and she'll help us out. So with that, I would like to introduce Kumu Tai. Thank you.
Alanui. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Feel so dated. See if I can get into this chair without breaking my neck. Okay. So you won't have to look at me for long. There.
You got it?
Yeah. Okay. So this is the topic of my talk today. The screen up. Hi.
There you go.
Okay, there. Okay, so if we're going to talk about the solstice, I want to put it in a perspective. So there's a Hawaiian olelo no iao, e lavaia no ke kai papa'u, he pokole ke aho. E lavaia no ke kai hohonu, supposed to be hohonu, e loa ke aho. So this is the fisherman that fishes in shallow water, he has a short line. The fisherman that fishes in deep water has a deep line. So what this pertains to is, well, which is easier? Which person knows more? Which person has more knowledge? And what is the source of knowledge? So the person fishing close to the shoreline doesn't need the deep skill as somebody fishing out over the reef. Another note, a little note, yao. Navai hui ka ole I ke akawai. E Alanui ma'a I ka hele ia o'u maumakua. This was said by Liho Liho. It says, basically, people were saying, well, you're pretty smart. And he's going, well, if I follow the path of my ancestors, how can I not be such? I am just learning and following in their footsteps. And I learned this a long time ago. Next one. I don't remember the Chinese, unfortunately, but great knowledge sees all in one. Small knowledge breaks down the one into the many. And that's said by Xuanzang around 300 BC. So basically, Hawaiian culture, everything was everything. Everything was interrelated and interactive. There was no physics separated from chemistry, separated from botany, etc. You can't plant a tree unless you know how the soil is. You can't plant a tree unless you know about the rainfall. You can't plant a tree unless you know what kind of tree it is, and so forth. So anyway, my knowledge is just, I'm still learning, but these are my main teachers. Ruby Kavena Johnson, who wrote lots of books, especially on stars. Ben Finney, basically voyaging, but everything. Charles Ken taught Lua, but also Lua means everything. Michael Chun's president of Kamehameha Schools, same thing, taught everything. Francis Walther and Karen Meach did a lot of work on studying structures and power lines and things like that. Not telephone power lines, but lines of energy on the island of Kauai. And so I've got some information from them as well. And to my lovely wife, Mickey, who helped me with this PowerPoint. So, power of the universe, as it is above, so it is below. So I can see we have mostly adults, so I thought I was going to get more kids, so I'm just going to skip through this kind of fast. Universe, cosmos, basically the same term, except cosmos, in my mind, gives a term of more order, and universe can be kind of chaotic. Power is the one thing I want to focus on, because that's where knowledge leads us. And this is why we study the stars, or why people in the past studied the sky so much. How did they get their power, and so forth. And if we're looking at power today, we can look at the power of the COVID-19 and how that's disrupted lives. So that's a real powerful force. And how do we get the power to put it under control? So even ancient knowledge has cognates today. Knowledge equals power. Religion. Ancient religions all look to the sky. The priest divined the sky. They developed astrological concepts based on the movement of the stars, sun, moon, and the planets across the sky. The state became a stronger force, coupled with religion. And, you know, if we go back to where the people were doing their first writings, Babylon and so forth, Assyria, way back there, where things are written down, you could see these priests were really not only studying the sky, but knew quite a bit about the sky. They were able to predict eclipses back in, this time, 4000 BC, as well as in China and so forth. Religious architecture equates to power. If we look at temples, how were temples oriented? If you go to Cambodia, the temples there, what's the name of the temple there?
Angkor?
Yeah, Angkor Wat. It's a huge complex, but what it's doing, it's mirroring the sky. You have these towers that are put in certain positions that indicate where certain stars are going to rise along this temple. Temples, the whole complex is, miles square. Heiau. Hei is, in my teachings, hei means to enclose or surround. Ao is energy. So the heiau was designed to enclose energy. Also, the heiau was open so you can see the night sky. This was extremely important. The alignments of the heiau were laid out so that you could measure the altitude of stars going across and so forth. The location of heiaus were either set in quadrupes or in triangular shapes. So they interacted and interrelated with each other. Here we are at Mānoa Heritage Center, Kūka'o'o, and just east of Kūka'o'o is another heiau, which is kind of surrounded by a Buddhist temple. So it shows, the overlaying of temples. Churches, Shot Cathedral is built over a Roman temple, which is built over a Celtic temple, which is built over a spring, where you can feel the energy of the earth moving underneath. Church spires, why are they pointed? They're pointed because they want to interact and merge with the heavens. Cathedrals, they show the power of the sky. They have, if you go to Saint Michel or Saint Chapelle in Paris, the whole top of the basement of the chapel is composed of paintings of stars. So there's this deep interaction of people with their environment. And their environment is the cosmos above them. So the movement of celestial bodies equates to power. So knowing where the sun rises, when it's going to rise, where it's setting, and how it's setting. And then people would make stories. And again, these are stories to explain what they're looking at. They're not necessarily their beliefs. Like in Egypt, I doubt seriously if they thought that there was this creature beneath the horizon that was giving birth to the sun every morning and then going around the other side and then swallowing the sun every night. But this is a way of just telling the stories of how the sun rises and how it disappears. Tracking the moon was extremely important for all societies. Looking at these two celestial bodies is how we develop time, which we're going to go into in a moment. Tracking the stars across the sky, the same thing. Stars rise 4 minutes earlier every night. So after about 3 years, there's a 90-degree difference in the altitude of the star at sunset. So people started realizing this. There was no TV back then. So people were out all night long. They're talking and they're watching all this phenomena taking place. And then special people we call priests or kahuna, they're taking notes. And they're noticing that year after year, the same thing occurs. So this develops into a study that we call today astronomy. But like I said in the past, this is all just one small part of a big picture called our universe or our cosmos. And then some people decide that, well, maybe these stars, planets, and sun have some influence on our behavior. So they developed an art called astrology. So if we're born and the sun was in a certain position in the sky with certain stars in the background, with certain planets aligned a certain way, this would shape your behavior and your way of life and your prosperity for all time. And most people today believe more in the scientific method. However, if you look in any newspaper, you'll still see there's horoscopes. And these horoscopes are based on where the stars were, 3,000 years ago. They haven't, a lot of them haven't acted on the shifts that have occurred over the past 3,000 years. So our system of counting, our mathematical system, is based on the tropical or solar year, which is 365 days, 5 hours, and 48 minutes. And when I first saw the 5 hours and 48 minutes a long time ago, I said, yeah, this doesn't make any difference. But it does. After a few years, they start to add up. And it definitely makes an impact if you're developing a calendar. The people in Mexico called the Mayans. They had all this stuff worked out centuries ago. They were able to calculate that the sun took 225 million years to go around the galactic center. And at each 225-year period, that time period would come to an end and we would begin another one. If you remember, I think it was the year 2000 or 2001, computers were supposed to go off and everything was supposed to go to hell because this was the end of the Mayan calendar. Well, it wasn't the end. It was just the end of a cycle. And then the Greeks, again, following on the Babylonians came up with the Mictonic year, which they began to notice that the moon and the sun don't really catch up to each other or don't really interact the way that they would like them to. So if you have a new moon January 1st, 1995, January 1st, 1996, the new moon is not going to be there. It's going to be 2 or 3 nights away. So they were trying to figure out, well, how does this work? Why can't we have the moon become the new moon on January 1st every time? So they were able to figure this out, and they realized that it does occur every 19 years, or every 235 months, or every 235 lunations. So just for an example, you have the new moon at January 1st, 1995. The next one will be January 1st, 2014, and January 1st, 2033. And if I had kids, I was going to draw this out a lot more because they like to do calculations. So if you at home want to do a few calculations, you can calculate earlier ones or later ones. So the main thing about cultures when they're developing and they're trying to develop an agricultural system based on which is then going to have a political system and a religious order, you have to know the sequence of time. You have to know that these cycles are going to renew, that after every fall, you're going to have a winter, after every winter, a spring, and so forth. So that's the natural order. And the celestial bodies act as an agent of change. So seasons, again, this was more for kids, but the seasons occur because basically the tilt of the earth. Without the tilt of the earth, 23.5 degrees, we would not have any change. The north and the south would be at the same angle to the sun as we orbit the sun, or in the past they thought the sun orbited us. Some people still think that, so we'll let them. But from Latin, we have aqueous, which means equi, or equal, and nox, night. So equinox, because of the tilt of the earth, the parallel rays of the sun are going to hit the planet Earth at the equator at a certain time every year. And it can be calculated with great regularity. And that's where the equator gets its name. When I was a kid, I kept getting mixed up between equinox and solstice. And then I think I was even an adult. Yeah, I was. And then a science teacher just told me, oh, well, just think of EQU, equi, equator, and equinox. And I went, oh, why didn't you think of that before? Yeah, I think it was already 30 or 40 or 50, I don't know, but definitely way past kid time. So latitude, the imaginary lines that go around the globe or the earth. And let me kind of skip down a couple slides and then we'll talk about that since we're already there. Oh, right there. So in Hawaiian, we have this system. So Alanui Kapikawa Wakea is the equator. This is the path of the belly button of Wakea, the great ancestor of all chiefs, which means basically all the people who came to Hawaii, because only people came to Hawaii were ali'i. The only people that could afford a canoe and all the resources to get to Hawaii. So those stories of Menehune and all those kind of people coming to Hawaii, I would kind of doubt it. And while I'm talking about doubt, there is no dogma in the Hawaiian culture. There is no one belief fits all. There are many names for the equator. One is Ke Alanui o ke Ku'uku'u, the pathway of the spider. And this is probably one of the older names. All the names of the islands have been changed multiple times. So the same with this. But this was easy to reckon by the Kanaka Maoli, because they were navigators. They studied the sky in order to survive. They studied the sky so they could move, sail their canoes. And primarily they're moving from west to east toward the sunrise. So if the sun is, let's say, rising at the same point every day, which is at the equator, that would be very easy to measure. But the sun is not. If you see the figure 8 there, the sun moves along that figure 8 path every day. It moves a couple of, a degree or so. Well, not even a degree, but it moves a little bit. And it continues moving up until it hits Ke Alanui Polohiwa Kāne, which is the Tropic of Cancer. And then kind of a miraculous thing happens when it's going up. The figure 8 is kind of skewed, so it doesn't look like a real figure 8. But when it goes up, there are a few days when visibly the sun looks like it's standing still. So if you are at a fixed spot on the horizon and you're looking at the sun, and then you go out and put a stick in the ground 1,000 meters out, the sun will look like it's not moving past that stick. It's moving slightly, but it doesn't appear to be moving as it's transforming to make the loop to head back down south. And that takes about 5 days. And there are he'a, which we'll talk about later, that are used to mark that happening. Incidentally, the Kanaka Maoli Polynesians are the only people to live and travel on both sides of the equator and both sides of the tropic lines up until Captain Cook's time, or the time of the Spanish. But they didn't live on either side, so we're the only people that live on both sides of the tropic lines. So all this knowledge was developed over thousands of years and passed down. And of course, passed down orally because no more paper and stuff like that. But passed down in the form of chants, passed down in the form of legends and so forth. From Manoa, on the other side of Manoa is Palolo Valley. Palolo Valley, in the back of the valley, there's a crater. It's called Cowell Crater. And this crater was made when Maui's fishhook, without going into the whole story, but Maui hooked his fishhook on Kauai. He pulled it, it broke loose because one of his brothers looked, and it flew overhead, landed in Palolo Valley, forming this big crater, Cowell Crater. And Maui and his brothers looked for months. And again, the months indicates a certain time period in the sky. And they found the fishhook, Manaya Kalani, in the crater. And Maui pulls it out of the crater and places it in the sky. But guess what? If you stand at Kuka'o'oheau and you look towards Cowell Crater, you will see Maui's fishhook, Manaya Kalani, the constellation in the sky, coming up out of the crater. So that's how these stories, come to pass. People observe nature, and then they see what's happening, and then they'll say, oh, at this time of year, Maui was doing this. And then he couldn't find his hook. And then 6 months later, he found his hook and pulled it up. And of course, that's when Scorpio was rising. So, yeah, so June 20th, June 21st is when we have the summer solstice, which is important in all cultures, all nascent cultures. Today, we don't go outside very much and study, and we have computers and all that, so it's really not as important to know as before. Then it crosses back over the equator September, and then December, it goes back down into the south. In the south, the line is called Alanui, Polohiwa, Kāne, which means the great pathway or the great highway, the shiny pathway of Kāne. And Kāne was, in the old days, he was the original and the most powerful of all the great ancestors. And he got diminished by the missionaries around 1824 or so. They had Kāne, Ku, Lono as the triumphant Father, Son, Holy Ghost, and Kāne was assigned to be the devil. And for years and years, my family, whose ancestors go back to Kāne, were kind of never wanted to say that was our great ancestor because of oh, you're the devil. So time is a construct, as we all know, that it's just very artificial. Einstein proved that if you go out in outer space and sail around for a couple of years and come back, everybody else is age and you haven't. If you're gone for 100 years and you come back, everybody you knew is going to be dead, but you're still going to be, you'll be maybe age 20 years, according to Einstein and those guys. So this annual renewal is something that can be expected based on the solstice. And it marks the seasons, it regulates life and ritual. We all have rituals, even though we don't know them very well. We watch Magnum PI, and he always wears a Detroit Tigers hat when he watches the games. People make the sign of the cross when they're about to do something scary. So we all have different rituals. But during these times of the equinox and the solstice, there were rituals in Hawaii. And to find out about them, you have to really dig and go through a lot of the hula. I started studying hula when I was about 18 and still studying. But I call it meditation and movement, because there are times when you're doing hula that you will get on a stage and dance, and then you just blank out. And then you don't even know you did the dance, and all of a sudden, you know, people are clapping, you're done, and it's like, oh, I'm finished. And then there are oli, or chants, that talk about Kapo, one of the great ancestors of hula, who would possess people. And these people would start to chant or start to dance. And then once you've experienced that, you can really understand how these oli and chants are developed. So the hula is the movement, and in ancient times, it was performed in the heiau. And it was done to honor the ancestors. I don't like to use the word gods, because that, from my teachings, was not an ancient belief. People were honoring their ancestors. So what we call au makua. Makua is parent, au is energy or essence. So once your parent is dead, if they were great, they become an au makua, or an energetic, or an essence of the parent. And akua is you drop the au. So you have akua, and these are the great ancestors, the ones that have many, 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 many followers. And I would liken them to George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, because they're the great ancestors of America, where Kāne, Kanaloa, Ku, and Lono are the great ancestors of the Kanaka Maoli. We never considered them like gods. They weren't all powerful, and God knows they weren't supernatural. They were very human in their attributes, kind of like the dudes up on Mount Olympus. What, you did this? Throw a bolt of lightning. Yeah, if you look at a lot of the constellations in the sky, they have, if you look at the Greek taxonomy, a lot of them have something to do with Zeus. And any children? Yeah. And a lot of them have to do with sex as well. So that's how they were able to pass down those stories. Okay, the mana. Mana is a divine power, and it's acquired through action. The definition of power is the ability to create or do something. So you can develop mana or this power through hula, through oli, also through birth, but I'm not going to talk about that because that's a whole nother thing. So the ali'i, through birth, had lots of mana. The kahuna were their advisors, sometimes their leaders, kind of like the Pope and the monarchs during the Middle Ages, depended on who was who had the power. You had a particular type of priest called the kuhi kuhi pu'u one, which means, kuhi kuhi means to point. Pu'u is a hill, one is sand. So what they would do is they would make models of the earth or hills or heiau, and then use these models as teaching devices. If you've been to Mānoa Heritage Center, you know there's a model of Manoa Valley made out of wood over, let's see if I can, yeah, right there. You can see it with the temperature reader on it. So that would be something kuhi kuhi pu'u one would develop. And then he would point out where to build the heiau, how the heiau would align, and then they would go out and walk the sites until they felt the mana or the power emitting from the earth. Now, what kind of power is going to be emitting from the earth? Well, there are people that walk with, you know, they like a Y-shaped stick, and they walk, and then the stick will pull down where there's water. Well, the kahuna would do that with his hands. He would just walk until he felt. And Manoa Valley is loaded with freshwater springs. And the water is flowing under the earth. And that produces energy. And that energy can be felt. A teacher 37 years, I'd have kids come up to me and go, and I would see kids sitting down in one spot, and I go, Kuma Tai, come here. And I go, what's up? And said, sit down. And I'd sit down and go, do you feel it? And I go, feel what? And they go, do you feel it? And then after a moment of just relaxing myself and being with that child, I can feel it. And then I look at them and they look at me and go, yeah. And that nothing else needs to be said. And for those of you who've been to Punahou, you know, we have a spring, and that's the sacred site or the heartbeat of the school. And literally, you can feel the pulsing or the beat coming from that spring. In Kalihi, there's a spring called Kunavai. They tried to build over the top of it. They tried to drain it. They tried to move it. It's still there. They built a condominium next to it, and the water would seep up through the condominium floor. So they had to eventually build a fountain inside. It's on Kunavai Street off Liliha Road. So if you don't know where it is, just go there. You'll be able to really feel the water. The water's coming up under the sidewalk. It's coming up everywhere because spring, it's a spring. It's not going to just stay in one place. The ducks love it. So this is what the kind of things that the kuhi kuhipu'o'one would do. And then they would build a heiau near or, pretty near a spring. If you go to Ulupo Heiau in Kailua and you walk along the lower side, which would be the Makai side, and you're heading towards Kaneohe, you will see several springs along the north side of the heiau. And that's intentional. And when the heiau was buried under bushes for many, many years, nobody remembered that they were there. But as we were clearing it, all this became accessible again. Kilohoku, another type of kahuna or wise person, also known as navigator. And as I mentioned, being able to move east to west, west to east initially, but then going back. Stars were very important. Time of year was very important. You had to know the seasons because during certain seasons, the weather changes, the weather is not so good. The winds become too strong to sail, so this knowledge would be passed down. Don't sail when the stars are in this position and the moon is in this position and the sun is beneath the pico of Wakea, because that's going to be a rough time of year. Wait till Kāne comes, Kāne the sun. So soon the sun is called Kāne when it rises over the horizon or rises over the equator. So when Kāne comes, then this is the time for doing various other things like sailing. In terms of heiau that are aligned, I'm sorry it's so small, but there's a heiau in the center of Oahu called Kukani Loko. Can I make it bigger? And thank you. And this heiau is located exactly in the center of the island. I mean exact. It couldn't be any more exact than it is. It was a site for the birth of the Ali'i, going back to Kapava. And let's see. Ku means to be upright. Kani, sounding inside. Loko is interior, so the sound coming from within. So if you're a mother, the sound is coming from within, and this is the time where you go to give birth. And this particular heiau uses the mountain ridges to mark the rising and setting points of various constellations, especially Makali'i or Pleiades, Subaru, one of the most important constellations that all cultures use. And there's a peak on the Waianae Mountains called Kuma Kali. And at Kuma Kali, it's also the time of the when the sun is at its farthest point in the south. It's when Makali'i will rise and set over that point. And then there are other points. There's a heiau up on the top of the mountain. I didn't put it up there. It's called Mauna Kapu. It's up above Makakilo. And you can align from Kukani Loko to Mauna Kapu. The sun will set over Mauna Kapu on the autumnal equinox. So, excuse me, not the autumnal equinox, but the winter solstice. Kapalaha Heiau, which used to be in Waikiki, there's nothing left of it now. There's an aquarium sitting on the site of the heiau today. So it was a good spot, so they decided to use it. And I imagine some of those stones that are in the walls of the aquarium came from that particular heiau. And this was used to mark the sunset, which set right into Pu'ukapolei. So if you look right across from the aquarium over towards Kapolei, on a certain day in May, the sun will set directly into the cusp, like my head going down, like that, into the cusp of the crater of Kapolei. And this is where Kamapua'a and his grandmother lived. And there's many stories about their activities, and a lot of them, if you read carefully, trace back to legends about the sun, the moon, and other celestial events. So a lot of these legends are, oh, there's a pig running here and there and doing this and doing that. These are, as one of my teachers said, legends are history in disguise. So these are just kauna, or hidden meaning. Any poet is going to have good kauna, or good ways to use words that reflect the meaning but don't really put it out there. I'm going to read an oli to you in a little bit, and that'll all become clear. So that when the sun passes overhead at the solstice for Hawaii, it's called Kaukala Kalolo. Ignore the comma in there. This just means Kau is standing, Kala, the sun, over the brains. So the sun is standing over your brains. And this would be the time when the ceremonies took place, is when the sun was directly overhead in May and July. Today we call it Lahaina noon. So I think the last Lahaina noon was in May 7th, and I think the next one will be around July 14th or so. If you really want to know, ask me later and I can look it up because I have it written down. So those times were a lot more important than the actual solstice, from what I'm able to gather, because they, that's when the sun is passing directly overhead. On the latitude of Honolulu was 21 degrees approximately. We can go 21.5 or 21.2 and so forth. Kauai is 22. So Kauai, I'll skip ahead. Not skip ahead. So Ahuaumi is up on the slopes of Hualalai. And people aren't sure what, there's 8 stacks of rocks, but I think they're used for astronomical purposes as well as others. Heiau had multiple purposes, it just wasn't one function. Like Mo'ukini was a family heiau that was turned into a sacrificial heiau when Pa'au came, one of the newcomer kahunas. But this is ideally suited for looking at the stars setting in the west, and the sun setting in the west. I spent many nights at Mo'ukini watching the sun go down and, measuring the positions of the sun along the horizon. And I was just doing it for fun back then, but now I'm realizing, why I was there. Waha'ulahea, which used to be down in Puna, now covered by all the lava, was ideally suited also to see east and west movement of the sun. Kumu Kahi, Kumu means source, Kahi is first. So Kumu Kahi is the easternmost point in the state of Hawaii. This is where the sun hits the island first. And this is at a latitude of about 18 degrees. So when the sun is, apparent sun's rays are coming up towards the point of the summer solstice, it passes over the heiau that was located there. And that's when they had their celebration. So they didn't wait for the solstice, they had theirs at that particular point. There's very little evidence to support what I said, but there's a little. And again, I leave it to you to go either find evidence against or for. And then Kauai. If you go to Ha'ena, Ke'e, there's a heiau there called Ka'ulu'u Pa'oa Heiau. And this is where a hula structure is built. And many halau still go there to perform for the akua there. And on the summer solstice, if you go out, the heiau used to extend out a little bit farther than it does today. Because of erosion, it's back in. But if you just go out from the heiau a little bit and look down the coast of the island of Kauai along the north shore, you can see Lehua Island. And I have not seen this, but when the sun's rays go over the horizon, there's an island called Nehoa, which is 8 miles away. And you can only see 3 miles on the horizon if you're standing on ground level. So if you're up higher, you can probably see Nehoa Island. But when the sun sets, there's a refraction. And the refraction shows the silhouette of Nehoa. And that marks the summer solstice. So, I mean, these guys are just sitting there watching, and then, boom, it's like the green flash. Did you see that? No, I didn't see it. Oh, you got to wait till next year. But, there are several people that saw it, and so they mark it. And then people go there just to see it. And then they would have festivals. They would take kukui nuts and howwood up into the high cliffs. And then they would light them on fire at night. And then they would pitch them off over the cliff. And then people would be in the canoes along the bottom trying to catch kukui nuts, burning kukui nuts, mind you, or branches of the hau, which are swirling down like fireworks, and to show that they were at this point during this time period. So it was kind of like you go to a concert and you get a hat or a t-shirt. So this was their proof that they were there. Yeah. On the Waimea side of the island, there's a ridge called Kaunaleva. Kau means to stand or place. Na, the, plural, leva, heights. So it basically means moving up the heights or of this particular spot on the ridgeline. And there was a heiau located there. And this heiau was built because it aligned with the island of Ni'ihau. And at sunset on the winter solstice, the sun would set behind Kaula, which is an island south of Ni'ihau. And during the winter, or during the equinox, it would cross over a lake called Kahapapa. And then the sun would go up towards Lake Hua, the island which is north of Kauai. So the heiau is called Ho'unu'unu'u heiau. So ho'u means to cause something. Ne'e is to move or crawl, and crawling up. So you would crawl upwards. And what this refers to, I thought it was crawling up the mountain, but it's the sun crawling up in between the island spaces. So the sun is crawling or moving between Kaula and Lehua. And then this is one of the oli I learned back a long time ago. He moku kaula hoa me ni'ihau. I kaulana I ka kawai hua a Kāne. O kalana o kala halali'i e. Hala kala kau makua o lehua. Kau ka lehu lehu o ke yahi yahi. Moi no kawai I luna I kalai. E yana no o lehua I ke kai. So this chant is given to Kalaniʻopuʻu, who I don't know if he ever went to Kauai, but the knowledge of this place was passed down, and he composed this oli. So it says the island of Kaula, friend or connected with Ni'ihau, because they realized that here's Ni'ihau, but Kaula there's a big spot underwater, but Kaula comes up, so it's connected. O Kaulana Kāne. So this is the famous waters of Kāne. And famous is the sun, Kala, of Halali'i. So Halali'i is where the sun stands on the equinox. It's a lake on Ni'ihau that's there half the year and not there the other half. So again, it pertains to the timing of the solstice, or the equinox rather. And then Halakala, the sun is setting, and the sun is setting by Lehua. So now the sun has moved from Kaula past Halali'i up to Lehua. So we're looking at the entire time period of a year from the time of the winter solstice up to the summer solstice. And then Kaukalehu Lehu Okiahiai. This means the sunset, the time just around dusk. And Moino Kauai, so Kauai is asleep. So Kauai is in the dark, but the sun is still up. Iluna Kalae. So this means because of the curvature of the earth and other kauna that are there, Kauai is in the dark, sleeping, but light is still present. And the light is this lehu lehu, the dusk light. The ano no lehua, the ano no o lehua ike kae. So the sun is moving into the sea past lehua. Now, when I learned this at first, the kauna behind this was that Kalaniʻopuʻu was in a battle. And during the battle, his companion was killed. So that's the Waihoa Kāne. And then the sun stands at Halali'i, so he has two people on either side of one person on either side of him, trying to kill him. So then Halakala, Kaumakua Lehua. Lehua is also a term for the first person killed in a battle, is the sacrifice. So they're called Lehua because of the red color. And then Kau Kalehu Lehu Okeahiahi. This has real pertinence today because Kalaniʻopuʻu has both of these men and he's choking them. So moi no kauai. So moi means they're sleeping. And then iluna kalae, that means I am the victor. And then eo is a victorious kind of saying. And then the lehua ikekai, so he releases the bodies and releases their life. But as we just witnessed in the first part, this is also showing the kauna of this place being a solar calendar, is related in that regard. So the night of Hilo, when Hilo is the first phase of the moon. Every phase of the moon has a name and a significance. So Hilo means twist, and ceremonies would begin on that night leading up to the autumnal equinox, or for the summer equinox as well. Ie were used, Ie is plant, and this plant was used to decorate the heiau. And they would put huge stalks out, and then that would let the people in the area know that they're approaching the time of the equinox or the solstice. And the Va'alalani refers to the kohuna. Va'a is canoe, and the priests would sit in lines as if they were sitting in a canoe in the heiau. And a certain prayer, which was called ka'uo, was recited during this time. And then bananas, coconuts, kalo, and ava were offered. And these were indications or symbols of the four major ancestors: Kanaloa, Ku, Kāne, and Lono. I think that's the last one. Yep. So thanks for coming and listening. I see some people disappeared along the way, but It's okay.
Let's share. Well, there we go. Hi, everybody. If you have any questions for Kumu Tai, feel free to put them in the chat box in time in regard to respecting people's time. If you have to go, it's okay. But if you'd like to stay and ask questions, then you're welcome to. I think for, sorry, I'm off the camera. Mānoa Heritage Center, we've been fortunate for the past several years to be able to kilo equinox and solstice sunrises from up above at the heiau. And you know, it's really just in the beginning for us to pay attention to details like where the sun is rising, kind of create our own solar calendar from that one space, and that we could always just stand in the same space and observe. For people who are also kind of interested in that sort of kilo, starting to learn about sunrise or moon, would you recommend a place higher up, a place at the ocean, just picking one spot and just always going back to observe?
I would just say your own house. Just, you know, because as a kid, I always noticed the shadows in my room would move. And then I started figuring out, and then I started, you know, putting marks on the windowsill, which upset my mom. But you can just do that, because I know it's hard for people to go out and go down to Waikiki, you know, to the aquarium and stand in a certain spot, or come up to, you know, Kuka'o'o and the gates locked at sunset or something. Or I used to go up to Ualaka'a Park, and from there you could see the sun in the summer setting way up into the mountains by Mauna Kapu. And then in the summer it would set out over the ocean. And then when I worked at Punahou, I built a little shrine, and I marked the two extremes of the solstice and the equator. So in your house is good. Just find a spot and just put tape or sticks or ribbons or whatever. That way you can keep track for yourself.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, you can unmute yourselves if you want to ask a question as well. I think, thank you, Kumu Tai. I don't see any questions yet. If you have any, you can also email them to us if afterwards you think of something a day from now or on the morning of summer solstice. We're going to be live streaming it, weather permitting, if it's not raining or super cloudy, on Facebook Live. And if it is raining, we'll probably still record it with a GoPro and just time lapse it and make it available for people to see or you can have a real time if you want to just sit there and stare at it. But we'll definitely be doing that. But if you don't have any questions, I just want to say thank you to Kumu Tai. And just keep learning and observing.
Thank you. This was really, I really appreciated this. This pulls a lot of things together, but you had so much information, it's almost overwhelming. So
sorry, I always do that.
No, because you're just so knowledgeable, and you pulled a lot of things together, but now I need to kind of look over my notes and see what the big picture is again. It's really good. Thank you.
See what I threw away.
Thank you so much, everybody, for doing our first virtual Kahaukani Conversations. This is exciting. It worked. You know?
I hope it's not the last.
No, I hope not either. Everybody take care, and we hope to hear about your own summer solstice observations.